Ok, buenas tardes. Vamos a dar una pequeña introducción para responder a sus preguntas, pero es importante, me voy a referir otra vez. Las reglas son que quien me pregunte en español, respondo en español, and who asks me in English, I will answer in English. So those are the rules. Spanish with Spanish and read English with English. Ok, pero voy a hablar en español al principio. Tengo un comunicado para su propia...
I have a communique for ease of reference of what I'm going to read. It is available in English and Spanish. And it's a summary of what happened today and then some comments, some short comments. I want to provide sufficient time for your questions. We inform the international community that the constitutional government of President Nicolás Maduro, with the support of every state democratic institution and Venezuela society in general, has defeated a new attempt by foreign powers to provoke confusion and disorder in the national territory. In the early hours of the day, a group of deputies from the National Assembly and a small group of low-rank military personnel placed themselves on a bridge in the eastern part of Caracas and made a call for a military insurrection that was ignored by the forces of public order, including by the initial group itself of military personnel stationed there, who have since declared they were tricked by one of their superior officers. This media operation for destabilization has relied on the immediate complicity from abroad of the President of Colombia, the President of Argentina, the President of Brazil, the President of Chile, the President of Panama, the President of Paraguay, the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, the White House National Security Advisor John Bolton, U.S. Senator Marco Rubio, the President of the European Parliament, and even the Secretary General of the OAS, who today was going to convene a meeting on Venezuela, knowing what would happen. All of whom in an interventionist and criminal manner made public calls for the Venezuelan military forces to disobey their legitimate commanders and thereby promote national chaos. The constitutional government of President Nicolás Maduro acted rapidly, isolating the focal point of public disorder with maximum attention to the safeguarding of the human rights. There has been no wounded thus far, and the fundamental freedoms of the Venezuelan people, preventing the indocent majority who have the right to live in democracy and in peace from being affected. In this way, President Nicolás Maduro showed once again that his government is the fundamental and only guarantor of peace and legitimate constitutional order in Venezuela. This new attempt by foreign powers to spark a civil war opened the doors to a military intervention from abroad and impose a puppet government in our country failed. The main reason for this is that it has become evident that this plan has no roots in Venezuelan society. The absolute majority of our people want to live in peace and with the full exercise of their sovereignty, independence, and right to self-determination. Following the isolation of the aforementioned focal point of earlier today, the country is in total normality throughout the national territory. President Nicolás Maduro has taken the necessary measures to guarantee the security and the right of peace of our people. The institutions of public order and of the application of justice will be in charge of ensuring that the rule of law prevails in this situation that attempted, through violent means, to alter the national tranquility. We call upon the international community to reject this violent attempt promoted by foreign powers to destroy the constitutional order in Venezuela. And we alert that this new modality of open intervention in the domestic affairs of coup d'etats flagrantly violates the purposes and principles enshrined in the UN Charter and the norms of international law, while also putting at risk the peace and security of the region. The international community should express a firm position in defense of the self-determination of people, national sovereignty, and the right to peace of all nations. That's what we haven't written, which we will share shortly. But my comments will be very short. You see, earlier this morning, there was a very dangerous incident that was supported by the U.S. government totally. They knew what would happen, to the point that Mr. Bolton said earlier this morning, or actually minutes ago, he said that the coup failed, but there was much more important people involved, and he knew what would come up. He didn't become aware of this by the news because he already knew what was happening. And he says that the coup failed. This demonstrates that the U.S. government, as in Chile in the 70s, or in the Dominican Republic, which in Sunday is the anniversary of the invention, or as in any other country of Latin America, consider Venezuela part of its property, and through war they want to destabilize using domestic agents as representatives of the U.S. in Venezuela. It was a dumb attempt, but very serious, very grave, because they do not have the vast support of the majority of the people or of those who control the order and security. What it demonstrated is that puppet government who is planning to come here to the UN is just an arm of the U.S. in Venezuela. It is shame. It is a shame. The government of President Nicolás Maduro has defeated all attempts to create a civil war in Venezuela, all attempts to create chaos to open the door for a military foreign operation in Venezuela. We demonstrated that the large majority of people want peace, and these minority groups on the side of the rule of law, the only oxygen they have to survive and act in a criminal manner is the support of the U.S. government, who, without any sort of shame, recognized that it participated in the conspiration. What we're doing here is to demonstrate how puppet governments, artificial governments, fiction governments, it has been demonstrated that they govern nothing in Venezuela. It cannot be pretended that they be recognized around the government as something. They're just an instrument for the pillage of the country to promote war, as in Iraq or Libya or Syria. And in Venezuela, this psychopath elite, warmongering, full of hatred, are using all means of information, diplomatic means, economic means, and now military means. Those four means: information, war of information. This morning at 6 a.m., you would have thought that there were 60 generals in the coup, whole teams of militaries, that President Maduro was in jail at a barrack. There was a bombardment of fake news in just 2 to 3 hours, and all that disappeared as vapor. It was fantasy. It disappeared because it was a propaganda apparatus for creating violence. The same with diplomacy. The Lima group came yesterday to meet with the Secretary General, and they told him that they support war in Venezuela, against Venezuela, openly. One of the leaders of the coup, Mr. Leopoldo Lopez, apparently requested asylum in the Chilean embassy in Caracas, who also supports the coup in Venezuela. And there are also other criminals who are hidden in that embassy. 25 lower-ranking officials who participated in the conspiration today. They are seeking asylum and now are in the embassy of Brazil, and Mr. Bolsonaro is giving them asylum. All this I'm explaining is for you to see how they are abusing of the diplomatic immunities and privileges to create a war in Venezuela. We have defeated them. The Venezuelan people has reached a victory, and it is the government of President Nicolás Maduro, but the majority of the people of Venezuela and the Venezuelan constitution who truly ensures and guarantee peace for Venezuelans and for the region. Here at the UN, those people have been defeated. It would be very hardly that someone here at the UN recognize someone as criminal as them as a serious and responsible government to be seated at the UN. So that defeat will have consequences in other areas of this puppet government to create a chaos and do the pillage against Venezuela. Questions? Muchas gracias, embajador. Muchas gracias por su presentación.
Footage of people, protesters being hit by armoured vehicles. You said no one's been wounded, but we've seen footage of that. We've also heard reports from doctors that people are being treated for injuries from rubber bullets. What can you tell us about that? And has the Maduro government committed not to use live ammunition against protesters?
Brilliant. Thank you very much. The only live ammunition which has been used is the live ammunition against an army colonel who was shot in the neck by one protester exactly in the same place. The only live ammunition, rubber bullets are no live ammunition, I'm sorry to say. They are used in crowd control, and they are no lethal weapons. The only actual lethal weapon that was used this morning was against an army colonel who was protecting the army barracks in that place. And as far as the truck, which has been repeating 10,000 times in the last 2 hours, the only incident that may have been an accident, and is the only incident that you want, you personally not, the media want to show as an example of the excesses in repression of our government. But let me tell you something. There was an attempt of a violent coup d'etat calling for an insurrection of armed forces. They were using machine guns and high-caliber weapons in that attempt. And the potential of that reckless attempt to create havoc and massive destruction in Venezuela was enormous. And it was the restraint of our government, which is used to this kind of street protest, which we can say that we were actually very fortunate to come out of it with as little damage as possible. I mean, we are proud, I am personally proud, that something as dangerous as happened this morning has finished with no lives to casualties to lament. ¿No?
Gracias. Embajador, usted menciona ahorita que es...
Ambassador, you're talking about an isolated event about the armor car. Can you tell us about the plan of action that you are planning in Venezuela about the commanders of the regions in Venezuela? Can you tell us what's the message? Because you're telling us that this has concluded, but the images are that people are still in the streets. We can see Leopoldo Lopez. These people remain in the streets.
Mentiras. El señor...
Thank you very much for your question. If you leave today in Venezuela, you would be receiving a message, a text message, an SMS from Mr. Guaidó saying, at this very moment, everyone to the streets, everyone to Miraflores, everyone to topple Maduro. But where's Mr. Guaidó? He's hidden in his office. Can you see that? He's asking the people to go to the streets. They're looking for a bloodshed, to see if there's a commotion event that can be used in the media. It's an important point that must be highlighted. As it always happens, big part of the people on the streets, they're throwing Molotov cocktails, trying to cause damage and to create damage against people. But now the military part has concluded and it's coming to an end. The multitudes who were Mr. Lopez is seeking asylum at the embassy of Chile. I'm so sorry, but he's hidden in the Chilean embassy, according to the very latest news that I have just received 10 minutes ago. So that story about a great commotion in Venezuela no longer exists. It was like a bubble. It was a media operation. It's not rooted or based on the Venezuelan society. Let me tell you something. Mr. Leopoldo Lopez called today for a military uprising. It's the very same person who in 2002 called for the military insurrection. It is the very same Leopoldo Lopez who called for military insurrection for the last 19 years. For 19 years he has been doing this. We know who they are. We know what they do. There's no responsible military in Venezuela who can consider him as a leader of anything but only the United States. In Washington, they are celebrating. By the way, the defensors of our embassy in Washington are being harassed by aggressive multitudes in D.C. I send them my regards. Microphone. Are you meeting with the non-aligned movement or with this group on the defense of the UN Charter to denounce this new attempt of coup d'etat in Venezuela? Right now, the coordinating bureau 15 meters away is just meeting, and as soon as I finish here, I will go to the non-aligned movement to make the public denunciation of what happened and seek from these countries who share the same principles to support and express their solidarity with Venezuela to all those who share the same principles, sovereignty, self-determination. What happened earlier this morning, luckily, didn't have any effect on the streets, but criminal potential is enormous. It is a manufactured act. It is the typical military coup of the U.S., fabricated for Latin America. It's a classic, but it failed. And it failed because it doesn't have a popular roots.
Because you're saying on one hand, this was just a propaganda exercise, and on the other, you say it was extremely dangerous and could have lost lots of lives. So could you explain what seems to be a discrepancy there?
No, there is no discrepancy. It's a paradox,
and
which is different.
Second part of my question, do you now believe that President Maduro is safe in power? Will he be in power in a couple of hours' time, in a day's time, in a month's time, in a year's time?
Thank you very much indeed for the question. There is no contradiction whatsoever. Just I said that the potential of that action was criminally enormous, but the actual truth was nothing. And the paradox is the following: as they had no root in our country and in our society, they attempted to ignite a civil war, calling for a military insurrection. But as no one believes in them, they achieved nothing. So the potential, the criminal intent was enormous, but the actual reality was nothing. So there is no contradiction, it's a paradox. And the second point is, our President Maduro safe the next 30 minutes, half an hour, 2 hours? Well, let me say, if these people is that they showed this morning is all they got, we are safe for the next 20 years. I mean, they have nothing. The only thing they have, which is dangerous, is the American government. That's really something to count on. I mean, we are not afraid of our people. We are afraid, or not afraid, we are cautious and vigilant on this superpower let loose around the world, wreaking havoc. And they try to do the same in Venezuela.
Thank you, Ambassador, on behalf of ANCA. First of all, I would like to kindly remind that usually, per tradition of this room, the first question goes to ANCA. Thank you.
I'm very sorry.
My name is Valeria Robeco from ANSA Newswire. My question is on the last word of U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton. Is just said that has called out Venezuela's defense minister, head of Supreme Court, and head of Presidential Guard, and he says that they agreed that President Maduro has to go. What's your reaction on that? Thank you.
Again, propaganda. Listen, this is President Trump, by the way, the self-proclaimed president of the whole world, and also the actual self-proclaimed president of Venezuela, Mr. Trump. He's saying that he's very concerned about freedom in Venezuela. Mr. Pence also has just tweeted saying that they won't let go the fight for freedom, freedom-loving people of Venezuela who are taking to the streets today, and we are with you. I mean, these are the actual leaders. Non-Venezuelan people can believe that these are the liberators on anything, you see? And the problem is that they are trying to mix people up by confusion and with this kind of information warfare, where they now say that the top officials in our country were involved in the coup and they failed to act at the last minute. But the fact is that these very same people they are accusing, they also are sanctioned and they are threatening with jail and threatening to send them to Guantanamo. By the way, these people are so gangster-like. It's the only thing I can think of. This is was published today. It's a no declaration by the Department of Treasury from the American government when they say that anyone who joins the attempted coup this morning and if sanctions or is under sanctions, they will be free from sanctions as soon as they join the coup. You see how they use as bait sanctions. This is a criminal use of sanctions. This is no sanctions for freedom. These are sanctions for coup and violence. And they treat Venezuelan officers as they treat mafiosi here in New York. And this is the wrong way to treat Venezuelans because they don't believe something as simple as this. We love our country. We are proud of being in Venezuela, and we need to be treated in a respectful way. They don't understand that thing. Yes, please.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you. What's going to happen to Mr. Guaidó? Is he going to be arrested? Will he be criminally charged in some way? And if not, why not? You described him as the leader of an attempted coup.
There is a cry in Venezuelan society for the man to be jailed, but I am not the president of Venezuela, nor the general attorney. The general attorney this morning said that he will act firmly. I can't predict what he is going to do. That's why I can't either explain the military plans. That's the first question was asked here before. I'm not the military planner and the top military brass, but what I mean is that it's obvious that the man committed a crime. Sedition, for everyone to see. It's sedition, it's a crime, it's even treason. The man is acting on behalf of a foreign power. In the United States or in any serious country, that man should be sent to prison. But let our state machinery and judiciary act. I cannot speak on their behalf. Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. In case that the public order situation in the coming hours worsens and there are additional clashes in the streets, what kind of scenarios are you planning for in case the situation continues to be complicated? Although you're saying that peace and tranquility prevails in the country, can you say that peace really won? Yes, I can tell that peace won. You see, for the last 20 years, we have been fighting this, the very same people talking about the very same things. 1 hour ago, I was explaining that to a journalist that in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, Brazilians, they dance samba, and they built a sambodrome, a place for dancing samba. In Venezuela, they have their protest, their place for protest. The only place they have is that area next to the barracks of La Carlota. That's filled with cameras, and everyone knows that. Everyone who passes around, you can see their faces, and you know where they hide the gasoline for the Molotov cocktails. It's their place for protest. That's why our security forces are restrained, because they know where everything is. That's the only place where international media go, because they see the people throwing Molotov cocktails there. But as far as they do it there, no one cares, because everyone knows that this is used for that purpose. The trouble is with fake news, because people start thinking that the situation is bigger than it actually is, but it's deflated. And those people are not leaders even at their very own home. The internal situation is under control. There's not a super plan ongoing. Ambassador, you have denounced that there are fake news, but how could you explain to people that while you say that everything is controlled and has been surpassed, the images are that people remain on the streets? And also, today, the United Nations asked both parties to restrain to avoid violence. And the image going around the world is the armed car. Media are terrible. You saw people with with guns, people calling for military insurrection, throwing military cocktails, but the only image that you show is the armored car. That's the information warfare. Do you think that the man driving the armored car, it's an assassin? It could have been an accident. I was not there. I cannot provide the explanation for what he did. But the first thing that you come is that he was there for paid by President Maduro. The images that you have seen are about the same place. And I can assure you that are the very same images from 2 years ago, from 5 years ago, from 10 years ago. It is the very same spot that the opposition uses to do their protests or demonstrations. It is their favorite one. That's why they are allowed to do it there. That so they can steam their energies there. The idea of chaos that they want to depict. Why don't they say that the armed forces in their 99.999% except 20 soldiers that are now seeking asylum at the Brazilian embassy, they are being very pacific and they have not used one single bullet, and that control was due to political condition, not to repression. There are cocktails, Molotov cocktails thrown out, but that's by the opposition. But we have been very careful to avoid that commotion excuse that would perhaps allow the Americans to claim that so-called right to intervene against a rock state. This is a sophisticated game. The U.S. put traps, and they think we have to jump into their traps, so they have the excuse to act. We are acting with intelligence. We will win this politically. With all due respect, do you think this is all the media's fault? No, I'm not saying that. But if you concentrate in just one single event, in the event of the armed car, about as if it was the event of the day, and you didn't understand that there was a coup d'etat, if you're telling me that the event of the day and last night, you will summarize it, what happened today is that one guy ran over someone else, then you lose perspective. And I don't think that you are the entire media. There's a whole lot of the media.
Sachs' recent report, Economic Sanctions as Collective Punishment, the case of Venezuela, and I quote, American sanctions are deliberately aiming to wreck Venezuela's economy and thereby lead to regime change. It's a fruitless, heartless, illegal, and failed policy causing grave harm to the Venezuelan people, which is essentially supporting what the Foreign Minister said last week. And Kevin Zeese, the attorney Kevin Zeese, had said that the theft of what $30 billion of Venezuelan money by the U.S. and the U.K. is modern-day piracy, and he advised that you sue in an international court. Have you considered doing that? And as a follow-up, do you expect that the U.S. will take more actions through the United Nations to try and weaken your government's presence here?
Thank you very much. Let me say something in Spanish, which I'm going to repeat in English as well, about the Secretary General question. There was a question here before in Spanish about the Secretary General. La pregunta fue, el Secretario General llamó a la restricción de ambas partes. Mire, yo tengo un problema con esa decisión del Secretario General o su vocero. Momento, él no puede ser imparcial cuando hay un gobierno reconocido en las Naciones Unidas, que es nuestro gobierno, aceptado por los
accepted by the member states, and their credentials being accepted last year. There was an attempt to overthrow it. Then the SG or someone else come right now to say that the parties must behave. Come on, it's a legitimate government. So the idea is the Secretary General has the duty to maintain the stability of our country and the only government in Venezuela. I cannot declare that accept that he declares himself as neutral in Venezuela.
Secretary General said, his Secretary General spokesperson said this morning that he was very concerned about the situation, and he declared his job was not to support one side or the other, and that they are calling for both parts to exercise restraint. But my point is that we are the only legitimate government of Venezuela in the United Nations, and the Secretary General should recognize that fact. And the event that happens this morning, which is that there was a reckless attempt, failed attempt, to overthrow by violence, our government should call for the Secretary General to exercise his duty for calling for peace and the respect of our constitutional, democratically elected government, and not to say that he's impartial or neutral or whatever other word, ambiguous word. The defense of peace in Venezuela goes through the defense of the constitutional government, which, as you could see today, is exercising restraint for the maintenance of our peace. And then, with your question, let me answer her question, which is very important. Sanctions kill, as simple as that. Sanctions are criminal. Sanctions are weapons of mass destruction. You don't see the smoke, but you see the effect. You see the deleterious effect of killing and suffering, and the sanctions use banks, sanctions use ships, sanctions use insurance companies, and financial blockades. They cannot get away with it. They cannot just say that they are concerned about liberty or freedom or the children in Venezuela and then exercise a ghastly, nasty policy of calculated cruelty. They are acting like torturers. It's a collective punishment. And you cannot, even if it's new, you could see for yourself that it's not the only time that they have tried to choke, to strangle a country using these kind of measures. And we are fighting against that, and we are denouncing this criminal attempt. And it's ridiculous that they try to play both roles, the balls of the killer and the balls of the savior. It's ridiculous. We have to fight that back. Let me...
Ambassador, and can you tell us why you cut our signal? We won't be able to show your comments today. CNN signal has been cut off in Venezuela. Will it last as long as the CNN Español cut, which was 2017? What's the reason? How long will it go?
Don't have no idea about that. I mean, if it happened, which I don't know, it should have happened few minutes ago, because I'm not there and I have no news of that. I'm not denying, just saying that I'm not aware. I cannot answer. The new person. Yes, okay.
Should there be a Security Council meeting, and are you going to ask your Russian colleagues to call one?
Brilliant. Not just the Russians are the only ones who can call for a Security Council meeting.
No, but they're your close allies.
Yeah, but, well, we have friends all over the place, not just the Russians. This is an important thing. This is 193 countries, and we're proud of our friends. And but the idea is that this should be a reason for a Security Council meeting, of course, and not just to beat to Venezuela bashing, which is the favorite exercise of the P3 here. P3 meaning UK, United Kingdom, France, and the US. I mean, why, when there is a criminal attempt so clear in Venezuela to sabotage and to destabilize our peace, why no one cares at the Security Council? They should be calling for one. This is something important, and we are anxious to go there and to expose the criminal attempts against our country. Yes, please.
¿Tienen una idea de cuántos militares se sublevaron?
Do you have an idea of how many military participated? And you said that some are in the Brazilian embassy. Where are the rest? How many military? There was. It was like 100 members who protect the National Assembly. That's why they were close to the gentlemen who participated in the coup. But the lower ranking. You can see here, and I can show you the video later. You can see these gentlemen from the military saying that they lied to me. My superior told me that there was a trouble in that area. All of us went there, but when we arrived, we saw what was happening, and then we left, and they were threatening us with weapons when we wanted to leave. Many of us left despite all the threats, but only 20 remain in that area who are the ones seeking asylum. There were 180 left, and 20 are seeking asylum. That's why there was no need for repression or anything like that, or for the use of lethal weapons. Look, in 2004, I will share you the link of all these proofs. In 2004, I want you to listen to this. We have gone through this for many years. It's not something new. In 2004, our armed forces detected 5 kilometers from Caracas, from our capital, over 150 paramilitary from Colombia who were in buses with uniforms from the Venezuelan army forces, ready to carry out an operation against a Venezuela barrack. That was carried out with the consent of President Uribe of Colombia. By the way, the government of Colombia is very conscious of what happened and participated in this coup d'etat. They are supporting the establishment of a mercenary army against Venezuela, as I have denounced in the Security Council. What I'm trying to say is that the armed forces of Venezuela are united, and this operation, the only thing that demonstrates is that Mr. Guaidó, he does not rule or governs any single place. And those people are seeking asylum in the embassy in Brazil because they have participated in the coup.
Brilliant. This is good. Okay, what happened to the U.S. and our credentials? They are going for it. They are working hard. They are planning. They are campaigning. They are talking to everyone. But today's event, I don't think it would be helpful. You see? What happened today, they tried to convince everyone that that man, this morning on that bridge, was the president of Venezuela, and we were usurpers. We were dictators. We were rogue states. But sorry to say, what it actually showed is that the overwhelming majority of Venezuelans want peace, don't recognize that puppet as anyone's representative. If he's a representative, he's a representative of the United States. And I think it has weakened his case here at the United Nations. Go for it. We're waiting. Everybody's working for it. They think that they can convince the world that that man is the actual president of Venezuela. He showed it himself this morning.
Embajador.
There's another question. You with glasses, yes. Each one country.
You just said that no weapons were necessary, but I hate to go back to this particular case, but would an armored car be considered a weapon? And
defensive weapon to crowd control, of course.
People
throwing Molotov cocktails, you need an armored car. Otherwise, you will be burned. Come on.
And then also,
you have a crowd throwing Molotov cocktails at you. Were they shooting at the crowd?
Yeah. That's why I'm asking. But
were they shooting
in
at
what
the
situation
crowd?
would this be acceptable? I mean, just
the crowd control. Let me tell you, behind those cars, armored cars, were these kind of trucks, massive trucks, full of water with a water cannon. This is the only weapon that was used there. I can show you the pictures. The lady with the glasses there. I'm sorry to say.
It's Pamela Falk from CBS News. You may have been asked a variation on this, but what will the government reaction be if there are any foreign troops or any kind of foreign assistance from the United States?
Well, it would be an invasion, wouldn't it? I mean, of course, absolute break of international law, absolute violation of the Charter, of the United Nations Charter, absolutely violation of all principles and norms of international law, and it would be ridiculous, which is the case now, that one of the permanent members of the Security Council is forcing other countries to break the law, that they are duty-bound to obey and comply. This is one of the most strange and weird situations we are in now, which is the superpower of the world is the main rogue state, going around without care, destroying countries, invading countries, and threatening with the use of force. And you yourself said, let me give you this piece of information. Check it for yourself. During the Iraq War, the American embassy in Baghdad had 5,000 staff, American personnel. So, war embassy in Baghdad. You know how many staff are in the American embassy in Bogota? 3,000. Do you think that 3,000 Americans in Bogota are working to fight for water or agriculture? This is a war embassy, I'm sorry to say. These people are planning an invasion. Ask the Americans what 3,000 staff are doing in their embassy in Bogota. It's not 3,000 soldiers that are going to invade Venezuela. No. It's not that simple. It's 3,000 planners, 3,000 intelligence officers, 3,000 trainers, 3,000 technicians, 3,000 information warfare technicians. It's a war embassy. Show me wherever in the world there are more than 3,000 Americans in one embassy. So they are planning for war. Let's take off the blindfold and look the reality as it actually is. Let me just, one question for a new person. Yes, please.
Embajador, tras la denuncia del presidente Nicolás Maduro.
After the denouncement of President Maduro about the attempt of coup d'etat in Venezuela, various organizations and presidents of countries as Venezuela, of Cuba, Mexico, and Bolivia have expressed their support in favor of President Maduro. Have you think about what strategies of support to carry out here at the UN? Yes, we need to denounce, to make that denunciation. This is not a domestic issue. This is something of an international nature. Without the U.S. power, without the CIA, without the intelligence apparatus, without the resources of the U.S., without the government of President Duque, this would have been impossible. Without the support of the government of Chile, who provide protection, without the support of President Bolsonaro, who protects the soldiers, this is an international conspiration. They always talk about the theory of conspiration, and they call them paranoics. But these people, this is real. It is clear. We need to make a denounce at this forum how violence and conspiration are being used. It is a war of intelligence apparatus. It is a war of banks against banks. The State Department against our Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Media against our media. It is a full-scale, unconventional war that is heating by the minute because they're desperate and have no other options. And the main purpose of Venezuela in our diplomacy, of our foreign minister, who, by the way, was sanctioned by this government of the U.S., criminalizing diplomacy, which is completely contrary what the United Nations calls for. The main purpose of us, and I include myself, my main purpose in my life, is to stop the war of President Trump. We have to avoid that these criminal actions end up in the destruction of a country that does not represent a threat for anyone. It is a crime in full development. And today was just one step in that direction. That's one of my main goals in my life, is to stop the criminals against my country. One more question and then I have to go. It's very simple. Will you make any request for a meeting of the Security Council? We will discuss that. It's very simple. Si yo tuviera el poder, yo solicitaría, yo llamaría esa reunión. But the thing is that for requesting that meeting, you will need the votes. And you need to convince 9 people to support you and to vote in favor. But the thing is, if any country proposes the convening of this meeting to discuss the situation in Venezuela, by the way, the president, the ambassador of Germany, the president of the council, he says that we are ready to discuss that. But there was no consequences as they would expect. Are they still ready now to conduct the meeting? It does not depend on me, but on those 9 countries. If it was for me, tomorrow we will have that discussion.